Iranian officials warning President Trump to not take any action against the country's supreme leader. This after President Trump said it's time for new leadership in Iran. She's an entrepreneur, an investor, and founder of the Iranian Diaspora Collective. She's joining us this morning. We want to welcome Moj Madeira. Moj, good morning. Thank you for your time.
Good morning.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Moj, there is a lot of talk about military intervention. As we all know, the San Diego-based USS Abraham Lincoln on its way to that area right now. President Trump said that he would bomb the entire country if Iran, the regime, tried to assassinate him. Iranian officials, as we know, are firing back with their own threats. And many Iranians who really want to see an end to this Islamic regime are saying, Mr. Trump, what are you waiting for? Is military intervention really the right option?
Well, I think this is a good question to ask. I think President Trump's first priority to the American people and to the global world is no harm, right? So these are serious decisions that he has to make. But if these is the kind of rhetoric he's throwing around at this point, it must be serious. At this point, when you have a government that is massacring its own people, you know, when we're now considering terms like the right to protect and whether or not this needs to be invoked to protect the Iranian people, I think at this point, he has to be considering military intervention. And I think we have to remember intervention is not occupation. I think we have to think about that we are the most sophisticated military in the world under our commander-in-chief, and he has an opportunity to use every instrument possible. That could include flooding the system with Starlinks. That could include continuing to put financial pressure. That could include strategic strikes. And really, honestly, I'd like them to consider shutting down the border into Iran from Iraq so that these militias stop coming in and murdering Iranian people. When you have Iraqi militias and Hezbollah coming in through those borders, I think one way to give some protection is to shut down that corridor. So I think there's a lot at their disposal. I think we're incredibly sophisticated. I think this is something that they must be sitting in rooms having discussions now today.
You just mentioned the responsibility to protect. Maybe some people on social media might start seeing that hashtag trending. What do you mean by that?
You know, this is a charter that was adopted in the UN, and it's something that I'm candidly learning more about myself, but I know that this is really came out of what happened in Bosnia. And I know that when you look back in history and you look at Rwanda, you look at Bosnia, where governments, sovereign countries are murdering and massacring their own people, the question that the UN and the United Nations and the global world has to ask themselves is, at what point is it your responsibility to intervene? And so that's why this term is starting to be brought up over and over again, is because right now what you're seeing is whether it's 12,000 or 20,000 people who've been murdered, right, in a 36, 48-hour period, you know, their intent was to murder all of these people and people who continue to protest. And we know that Iranian people want democracy. And I think the most important thing to remember is many people ask, you know, does President Trump believe in democracy in Iran? And I think the most important thing to remember is that the Iranian people believe in democracy in Iran. And the only person in the world that is offering to help them to get there is President Trump. And so the responsibility to protect is, at this point, with 800 people potentially going to be hung for crimes against, you know, the state, a crime against the state, that we have a right to protect. And I think that the UN needs to invoke this, and I think President Trump is most likely considering it.
You talk about that democracy, and millions of Iranians want that in the country, the diaspora, outside of the country. And often we're very involved in it, anybody who comes from an Iranian background. But for others who might be watching right now, and this question should be asked, is what is really in this for Americans and for America?
As an Iranian American, I'm always going to be thinking about America first. We are currently very worried about where China and Russia sit on a global partnership with us, and we're not liking those partnerships right now. We're not liking the terrorism, we're not liking the wars they're invoking, we're not liking the trade they're invoking. And so if we want to have a better grip around China and Russia, which we do, and that is an America first priority, and that's not just this president, that's every president. Iran currently gives and sells 90% of their fuel to China. So if we want to put China and Russia in check, we must put Russia in check. I'm sorry, we must put Iran in check. We must have a regime change. And so it is an America first policy. If you look at what's happened in Gaza, what's happened in Palestine, what's happened in Israel, I mean, we will continue to hemorrhage military and intelligence expenditures if we don't put this regime in check. And I don't think we can continue to let it go on any further.
The people of Iran this morning, Moj, still in a digital blackout. Do you expect this to continue?
We have an obligation to make it not continue, and I think Elon Musk is the man to flood the state with Starlinks. But yes, right now there are 300 plus hours blacked out, and people need to understand we're talking North Korea style. One thing I think people really also need to understand is that we have been benefiting from the intelligence of the Iranian people and their citizen journalism over the past, 15, 20 years. If they shut down Iran into North Korea, we will no longer actually know what is going on there anymore. And given what they're capable of, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Gaza, and around the world, knowing that they are the largest terrorist organization in the world, I don't think we can afford to leave them without communication. And I think it must be an American interest to get them back connected. And so I think we have the intelligence to do that, and it's our responsibility to get them back online.
Moj Madeira, we appreciate your time talking to us here in San Diego.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate you.
We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.